Jason, thank you for taking time to talk to Gio and I today because I suspect your calendar is full.
Been crazy for
Although
sure.
I guess you're not the boots on the ground, but we talked you into joining us today to talk about the alliance between VentureX and Office Evolution. And I asked you before we started recording, when did this go on the vision board? And you said a long time ago. So I'd love to hear the backstory on it and, what your vision was to bring those two companies together. But before we do this, Giovanni also shared that you recently made an addition to your family while the craziness was going on. So daughter number 2 was born a few
Yes.
weeks ago.
The daughter number two. So I've had, two full blown. I guess she still qualifies as a pandemic baby, but this time we didn't have to wear masks while she was giving birth. So that was a little bit better, and I was able to go to the appointments. But I have a 2-year old as of Friday and a 2-week old. So yeah, hands full.
So wait, so they're 2 weeks apart. 2 years and 2 weeks, or
About, yeah, right,
about
almost
ish.
2 years apart.
Yeah,
They're,
almost 2 years,
they're
less than two
yeah.
weeks. Okay.
My wife said the days, it's like 700 and whatever that is, 2 years minus 2 weeks worth of days apart.
That's wild, right? Pandemic baby and this one. So you had a lot going on while you were pulling this deal together. So give us a story.
Sure. So it really probably goes back to some of the original conversations I had with Ray when we were looking to turn VentureX into a franchise, and a little bit of that history. It started in 2012 in Naples, one location, 8,000 square feet with a real estate developer. Started conversations in 2015 about franchising that, and actually launched as a franchise in May 2016. And really at that point, we're pretty easy to say we were outsiders to, modern co-working at that point. I think we were all taken aback how archaic co-working still was in 2015, 2016. You still had just a few players that were out there. Just your two big guys, right? You had
Yeah.
Regis and WeWork. That's everybody had started using WeWork synonymous with the industry, kind of like Kleenex is.
Yeah, probably
Brand.
right around then. Yeah.
That's when the dream was still completely alive with WeWork changing the world with these types of things. But what we looked at is, what's really the difference in these locations? And the only analogy we can make was hospitality, and how hospitality was in a similar juncture 30, 40 years ago when they were, developing the star rating system and these brands started to combine. We didn't want to sell fluff is the bottom line point, right? We felt like a lot of the brands, they were just selling fluff about what made them different. They were feelings and things that made you feel different, which is great. I believe in, selling the dream and customer service. But I said, what's actually difference between these two, right? Like, how do you place these? Is this a 2-star, a 3-star, a 4-star, a 5-star? So we started really putting star ratings on all the brands that were out there, and thought that there was a big opportunity to be that 4.5 star type brand, right? 5 stars sometimes can get a little bit of stuffy at times, right? I prefer, the vibe of a Four Seasons or a Westin over Ritz Carlton, just my personal preference per se. So we thought, there's a lot of people that are kind of like the Courtyard by Marriott, but who's the Marriott, right? There's some Hampton Inns, but who's the Hilton, if that makes sense, right? So we thought that there was a crowd that was growing up in co-working that wanted a nice space, and that was VentureX, right? So we thought VentureX could fill that void of that 4.5-star type of professional Class A office space, nicer furniture. We said, let's make actual differences. We saw people had 36 and 48-inch desks. We wanted 60-inch desks. We originally worked with Gensler on design, Herman Miller, some of these other big brands kind of developed the space, top-notch technology. And again, the same thing you would expect going into the Hilton versus the Hampton Inn. Nicer toiletries, nicer sheets, better mattress, better pillows, things you could touch and feel, not just feel good things. So that was step one of that. But with that same analogy, we thought, well, is there an opportunity to become the Hilton or the Marriott of the industry, right? Because under Marriott, whether you want the Courtyard, the Moxie, the Marriott, the JW Marriott, the Four Seasons, the W, like you have all of these variables. They have 38 brands, which means, they have 38 teams worth of people all rowing in the same direction. Most importantly, consumers have the Bonvoy program. Hilton has the honors program. So you get your points, and it's not really reciprocity in hotels, but you get your points, right? Staying within that family of brands. So that's buying power. If you think about it from a hiring perspective, you can now hire somebody that can support 38 different brands. That company could go public. It's sustainable. It's built behind franchising. And that's really where the initial idea came from, is we looked at hospitality as the placeholder to where co-working could go 5 or 6 years ago. So Ray Titus, my friend and mentor, founder of United Franchise Group, believed in that. And 2019, as you know, we acquired VentureX. It started off as a joint venture. The original founder, they're still involved. They have a beautiful location outside of Naples. So they're still in the VentureX family. But we acquired VentureX, and that's when I took over as the president. And that was part of the plan. Part of the plan, me moving back to Dallas, was to try to put this CoWorks thing into place. But the pandemic had something to say about that when it hit 30 days later. But that takes us up to the history of VentureX, if that makes sense, and kind of answers that first question. And then started conversations with Mark at Office Evolution, probably right at the beginning, the onset of the pandemic, about that, because his background was also in hospitality. It didn't start as this, takeover or buying or acquisition. It's more like conversations I had with Gio, where it's like, look, I'm an outsider, right? I didn't come in and think I knew everything about co-working. This could be a pipe dream. Am I just completely, insane thinking this? And most people I talked to said, hey, that makes sense, right? Like this Marriott, this Bonvoy, everybody rowing in the same direction. Consumers can go to multiple different locations. So a lot of smart people I said that to thought it made sense. And that's how the conversation started back in 2020.
So I think it's really interesting. Let's kind of take a step back. And overall, UFG doesn't have a real estate background, other than the real estate they obviously do for their existing brands. But such a major part of VentureX is the real estate, right? So there's been a learning curve over the last few years as y'all have stepped into that. So you have a really, really strong real estate background. So you want to talk about your real estate background a little bit and how it helped and what the growing pains kind of have been to grow into the brand, if you will?
Sure. So next month will be my 15th year as a licensed real estate person. Before that, I started just kind of for a hobby, using my VA loan to buy and flip houses in Abilene, Texas, through Atlanta.
In Abilene. Wait, were you in Abilene last?
I was stationed. I was at Dias Air Force
okay,
Base.
got it.
Yeah, so I was stationed at Dias Air Force Base when I bought my first house, and 2 acres of land, and I had a push lawnmower, so that made sense to me back then. But it was, at that point, you could close on a house in 7 days, VA loan, 100% funding, and I wasn't even fixing houses, just putting them back on the market, right? They would just sell for more than I paid for them, and I'd typically close before I even made a first payment on the house, right? So I was buying them, pretty much just flipping the contract to somebody before I moved into them. And after allowing a real estate agent to make money a few times on me, I was like, I'm never letting one of these idiots make money off me again. What does it take to get my license, right? So that's why I got my license, was to do my own deals. That turned into a real estate brokerage, and that eventually is what got me into franchising. Is I turned that company into a franchise and sold that to a local publicly traded company. That was my claims to fame that I'm still riding the wave on. The first edition of Forbes 30 Under 30, which was 10 years ago. That was the very.
Wait, you were on that list.
I was on the list. Yeah. So I was on the very first Forbes 30 Under 30. Some other big giants were in there. So I'm kind of, you could Google it and it still shows up, but there were some big people in that magazine. But I made the cover of Realtor magazine that same year, 30 Under 30. I did My First Home, a few of the reality TV shows, the casting for $1 Million Listing Dallas, but it never aired. Gio could tell you we have a lot of $1 million houses and all the drama, but it's not as sexy of a house. A $5 million house in Highland Park is not as enticing or makes for good TV as a house in Malibu or New York City. Right. It's not as interesting.
Yeah.
But that's my background. And I started all of that from a flexible office space back when it wasn't cool. I was in flexible office back when you were kind of like a second-class business citizen and nobody really understood it back in 2007, 2008. So that's my background, but now I'm actively still a broker here in Texas, California, and in Florida. So I'm licensed in 3 states.
That's awesome. So growing pains on the real estate side, right? I mean, going from taking down 25 to 5,000 feet for Sinorama to taking down, 12, 15, y'all just took down 44,000 square feet in downtown Denver. I mean, there's major differences between those. So you want to share kind of some of those things that have gone on and how not only internally y'all gotten comfortable with it, but how you've gotten franchisees comfortable with that investment.
Sure. So